Hi to all of you joining. We will get started in just a moment, just waiting for everybody to join, but thank you so much for joining us today. Hello and welcome to all of you just joining. I'm just giving a couple more minutes until we have a few more people logging in, and then we will get started. Thank you. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get us going. Some people are still logging in, and thank you for joining us today, but it is 11:01 Pacific time, and I know we have a lot of great content to cover today. So welcome to Understanding and Preparing for the 2022 USDA RUS-DLT grant webinar. I am Dana Satterwhite, and I'm with an organization called Learn, Design, Apply. We are a grants consulting and management company, and our job is to do webinars just like this, spread the word about funding programs and opportunities that might be of interest, and then to help you understand if you can be competitive, how to build a competitive application, and give you some general tips and tricks on how to pursue funding overall. Today, I am joined by some wonderful guest speakers, and I will introduce them as we get to their portions. But we are very lucky to have some experts, both on the side of the USDA, as well as a recent recipient of this grant who has actually been awarded this grant twice now. So some great experience and can give some firsthand perspective on what it's like to pursue this grant and actually go through the implementation process of it. So thanks again for joining us today. And with that, I'm going to start us off with passing it over to Peter Hawks, who is with the USDA as a general field representative. He covers the areas of Idaho and Montana, and he's going to review the basic principles and goals of the RUS Distance Learning and Telemedicine Grant Program. So off to you, Peter.
Hey, Dana, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you can hear me fine. It's a great day. I'm showing you the 2020 Distance Learning Telemedicine Grant Program because we have not announced a new funding opportunity announcement, which we anticipate in December 2020. But to get started, we're talking about distance learning and telemedicine grant program. They're not exclusive, they're inclusive of both distance learning and telemedicine. The grant program helps rural communities acquire technology and training necessary to connect educational and medical professionals with teachers and providers who serve rural residents at a local level. We'll go through sort of a roadmap. Here's kind of the 6 things I'm going to talk about. DLT, what are the basics of the program, eligibility, matching, scoring, applying, and assistance. And if I run a little over, forgive me, but I'll try and speak swiftly. Next slide, thanks. So the program's purpose to provide financial assistance to enable and improve distance learning and telemedicine services in rural America. The program helps rural residents and business overcome the effects of remoteness and low population densities by providing access to educational training and healthcare information services otherwise not really available. These services are necessary for everybody in sustaining economic and community development. The program offers services in technology to support via audio and video equipment, broadband facilities, and other technologies that are being used by students, teachers, medical professionals, and rural residents that are benefiting from the services. We really want to increase rural access to education, training, and healthcare, and by providing these resources and the other resources that are otherwise unavailable or a limited scope. So rural utility service under USDA and the telecommunications programs. We've funded this 3-4 times, I think now, with an average of about 400 applications per funding opportunity announcement, and around an average about $100 million awarded to people throughout the United States. Next slide, please. So what is distance learning as we define it? It means synchronous delivery of curriculum via telecommunications and promotes the connection of students and teachers at remote sites. Hub and spoke is the way I like to sort of describe that connectivity, even though it's virtual. It's to provide educational programs, instruction, and information operating in one area, whether rural or not, to students and teachers who are located in rural areas, or connect teachers and students located in one rural area with teachers and students who are in a different area. Next slide. Telemedicine is synchronous telecommunications link to an end user for medical professionals at separate sites in order to exchange healthcare information for the purpose of providing improved healthcare services to residents in rural areas, and it benefits the rural residents, reducing their travel and improved access to service. Seen a variety of different applications of this, both distance learning and telemedicine. I'm really excited to have ISU on to share their experiences. We've connected all sorts of different organizations. I'll give you a couple highlights as we go through some of the eligibility and who can apply, and I'll tell you some examples. Oh, here we are. So following entity types, really pretty much any organization, profit or nonprofit, and anybody up to pretty much other than an individual or a partnership can apply, as long as its intended use meets the need and the definition of the program as defined in the FOA and in our Code of Federal Regulations. So one unique example I learned of in Washington State was a school district on the coastal community that had 4 or 5 different schools that wanted to apply to this program. Absolutely, we want everybody that can and could apply to apply, but in this case, it made more sense to combine the schools because they're sharing resources and education and material. So they appointed one school as the lead in the application. There's been ambulance, what do I want to call it? Medic One or ambulance services that have benefited from this for getting connectivity, and while they're moving their vehicles out to respond to a call, to help educate and train their medical workforce, then just teachers and students, and then also nurses, and providing training to remote clinics in let's say there's a cooperative sort of hospital organization that I'm thinking of that enabled their education to benefit from this program and get their nurses and students connected. Eligible grant purposes. So this is a really interesting one because it's really meant for the direct technology that connects the end user and the teachers and the instruction. So it's for all the pieces and parts that enable that virtual conversation and instruction and education and support and resources from medical professionals as well. It's not for like furniture, for example, or window screens. It's for the actual physical connectivity that enables that distance learning or telemedicine to function as intended. You can acquire some programming. It's not used to develop programming. There's technical assistance and instruction on using the equipment that can be apportioned off in your grant to support the delivery of the service once it's all installed. Next slide, please. So you can get awarded anywhere from $50,000 up to $1 million. There's a matching contribution that has to come from your entity that's applying. It can be in cash or in kind. It has to be, if it's not cash, it has to be for a purpose that would be otherwise eligible for grant funding and must be integral to the project. You cannot use other federal funding unless there's a statutory exception. And I really haven't seen that. So if somebody has an example and has a question about it, I'll probably answer it afterwards. Anyway, the new, only new non-depreciated equipment. So you can't go buy refurbished equipment to facilitate this. It's got to be new if you want to use it for your match. Suppliers, vendors, their offers cannot be used for match. And for some of the other territories, American territories, there are special matching provisions that'll be explained in the FOA when it comes out if you are from one of those areas. Scoring. There's a maximum possible 110 points, and this is the 2020 and 2021 FOAs. It's three basic or two big categories: objective scoring criteria, subjective scoring, 80 points for objective, 30 for subjective, and objective is based on rurality, economic need, and special considerations. So there's three bullets here: STEM, opioid, SUD, and opportunity zones. Those three bullets applied to the 2020 FOA. A couple of them were removed from the 2021 FOA. Tribal consideration was added in the 2021 FOA. I want to be clear because we don't know what the next FOA is going to say. Special consideration points will be different. Maybe similar, but definitely different. The subjective criteria, needs and benefits. Does the applicant really express in their narrative what need this funding will support and how will it benefit the community and the end users? It's very important that that's articulated loud, proud, and clear in your application. Next slide. It's critical. Any applicant has to have a SAM.gov registration. System for award management helps us make sure that if there's any certifications for financial assistance is there and viewable and as part of the application. but it also confirms the entity that is applying. So it's very important that your organization have the SAM.gov registration before they apply. And if you're thinking about applying, just get the registration done as soon as possible until the FOA comes out. Don't wait. Next slide. Applying. Here's sort of the main chunks of information we're going to ask for in the application. We have the site worksheet that explains each site. We have the executive summary or the narrative I mentioned of the project. Items that support your scoring, items that support matching, define the scope of work. What are you doing? How are you going to do it? And who is going to do it? And when is it going to be done? Is very important. So we get a good feel that you've thought through and have a good plan around what, how to implement all this equipment. Statement of experience, and then a whole host of other items. It's very good to have support from local officials, local government officials, state officials, anybody that supports the program and what you're intending to do and why you're going to do it is very helpful. And then any other supplemental information that to support your application is always good, and that could come from a variety of different sources. Next slide, please. Assistance, that's me for today. And then if you're from any other state, we have a large number of participants today at our USDA.gov. Contact us. You'll find the GFRs that support each state. My colleague John Holman supports Washington and Washington and Oregon. We have Natalie Kovac, who is up in Alaska. Myself, Idaho and Montana. We have Scott Davis in Wyoming and Robert Machado in California, Brad Clausen in Utah and Colorado, and Brian Smith and Billy Kentner in the Southwest for Arizona and New Mexico. So that gives you a quick list of who's on the Rocky side. If there's anybody on the East Coast, feel free to reach out to me or click the link and we'll answer any questions you have. Thanks, Dana, for letting me participate and chat with you all. Have a great day, and I'll look forward to answering some questions. And I'm really excited to hear about what ISU is going to share, because they are a two-time recipient of DLT awards from the USDA. And Dana, I'll pass it to you to introduce them.
Thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate that. And Peter will be sticking around to talk with us and Idaho State University at the end of this, as well as to answer questions. So we appreciate you being here. And to Peter's point, I'm going to zip through a few slides so that we can get to the best part of our session, which is the conversation with ISU and hear from them on what they've done. But before we do that, I just wanted to share some sort of best practices and general tips and tricks for how to approach this grant application. As Peter said, I'll just reiterate that this grant is all about helping to bridge the digital divide by providing that real-time, interactive, distance learning and telemedicine solutions, equipment, hardware, and software to benefit the most rural and underserved communities in our country. So at the end of the day, you want to continually ask yourself, is that what my project is all about? And if so, this is probably a good grant for you to consider. Again, I'll zip through some of these basics since Peter gave us a good overview already. The maximum award amount for this program is up to $1 million. This year, we have heard that there are at least $62 million allocated to this program and possibly more. And then again, as Peter mentioned, there is a 15% matching funds requirement of your federal request. I'll jump into a little bit more detail on the scoring criteria just to give you some ideas and some tips on how to maximize that score. As Peter mentioned, it is broken up by objective scoring and subjective scoring. Your objective scoring is based on the demographics and the geography of where your locations are physically located. So that scoring is comprised of several different pieces: your rurality, and that's measured by census data. So how rural your location is based on population data. So it's a sliding scale that goes into that score. The most rural will be anywhere that is located within an area that has a population of under 5,000, all the way up to 20,000. Anything beyond 20,000 is not considered rural by this grant program's definition. And again, there are census websites that we can help direct you to help start to sort through your locations and start to understand what your rurality score looks like. Secondly, you have your economic needs score, and that's based on poverty data by county. Again, we have some resources that we're happy to share with you on where to go to find that county data so that you can start to calculate what that score looks like for your economic need. And then again, to Peter's point, we do not yet know all of the details of what your special consideration points might look like. In the past, he mentioned that they've looked at things like opioid and substance use disorder projects. Anything related to serving tribal locations has been in the past a source of special consideration points, as well as STEM education. So more information to come regarding special consideration, and that will be released with the guidelines when the grant is announced. We have heard, and Peter, you can verify or say we might just need to wait and find out until the announcement, but we have heard that there probably will be a separate allocation of funding specifically for projects that do have that focus on opioid or substance use disorder, not necessarily tied to special consideration points, but they may have an emphasis on projects that address that as a separate piece. So more again to come, and obviously always look to the guidance when it's posted to see what changes come from last year's application, and we'll be following that as well. So you can always reach out for more information as that announcement comes out. And then the last section is that subjective scoring section, and that really comes down to your needs and benefits narrative, which is the scored section of this portion of the grant. So that's really where we ask you to focus your time and energy when you get to that part of the application. So some quick tips and tricks on how to be competitive within this program. The first one is to maximize that objective score. So take a look at those locations you serve, that you want to serve, the geography that you are covering, understand who your project partners are, and then we can start to map those out and look at, are they going to be a hub? Are they going to be delivering the content and the resources out to the rural communities, or are they going to be an end user or a hub/end user, where they're either just receiving those content and services or doing a little bit of both? That will be a factor when calculating that objective score for rurality. You'll then look at those population data points in the census website to find out what your score per location is. Additionally, you'll look up that poverty score based on the county those locations are in, and that will calculate that objective score. We can help guide you to sort of understanding what type of score is most competitive in this program historically, and give you some ideas on how you might be able to reconfigure your list of locations or add some additional project partners to make your score higher and more competitive. And as I mentioned, that subjective section, that needs and benefits section, that is your scored narrative. This is a huge piece of your application that reviewers really go to truly understand what it is you're trying to accomplish in your project and your goals. What are the challenges that you face? This section is really where you get to tell your story and share your experience of being an organization that serves rural communities or might be located in rural communities. Really talk in detail about the challenges faced, how you want to solve those challenges or address those challenges, how the budget you're asking for in this grant proposal will really help make a difference, will drive outcomes and bring benefits to the communities that you serve. Really make this personal and emotional to the communities that you're serving and that you're in, so that the reviewer really understands how much this project will mean to the communities you serve and also the impact that it will have. Include really specific information, both on the kind of data points, but also, again, those personal challenges. Give examples of what this technology, what these solutions you're asking for funding for will really help do. And you can absolutely tell those personal stories. And I think when we speak with the Idaho State University team, you'll hear a little bit of that come through in their projects that they've been funded for. As another idea, just going into detail on this needs and benefits, we always suggest mapping out your needs, your benefits, and your outcomes in some sort of visual chart. It just gives the reviewer a really clear understanding of how you went about the process of coming up with your application, your goals. You've identified those needs first and foremost. Then you talk about, hey, what will we accomplish with this project? What are the benefits that will be brought to those that we serve? And then the outcomes are different, right? Those are a little bit more measurable. That's where you can bring in, we anticipate that we will be able to deliver services to X more number of people, that kind of thing, that measurable specific outcome that comes from the benefits and starts with all of the needs that you address first. Again, this is just kind of how to map out that section. It's going through those needs and then articulating each of the benefits and outcomes you anticipate from those needs. Really dive into detail here. Again, this is your opportunity to tell your story, to talk about the challenges that you face in bringing the services that you're hoping to the communities that you serve in the locations that are in your service area. Peter referenced some of these things as well as far as requirements and other elements of this section that you definitely want to address. Project support, demonstrating that you've talked about this with key players as part of the project, both on the implementation side, but those that are going to be receiving some of the benefits. Showing letters and any quotes or testimonials or stories about people that are going to be impacted and going to be involved in your project really help bring the reviewer to understanding how big of an impact this project will have and who all has really bought into this program and is excited about what you're doing. Talking with your state director at the USDA offices is not only a requirement, but it's a great idea so that you can be sure you're in alignment with the state plan and talking about what you're going to be doing. Additionally, talking with your general field rep, like Peter Hawks, you want to make sure that he's in the loop. He's going to be behind you, and he is your advocate for how to make sure that you're positioning your project appropriately. You're going to follow all the kind of USDA requirements and guidelines, but not only that, he can share with you sort of best practices of what they see in the past. And then again, you want to make sure there's no duplication of efforts. If you've looked at this grant or been awarded this grant or other grants in the past, you want to make sure that anything you're asking for in this new proposal does not duplicate any of those past efforts. So just as a visual, I won't go through all of these one by one, but I wanted to put these up here to just sort of get brainstorming going and ideas flowing for what types of projects make for a strong application and good ideas for the types of projects we've seen in the past. It can really be all over the map. It doesn't have to be strictly distance learning or strictly telemedicine. It can be a combination of the two, and it doesn't have to be schools and hospitals. I think when we hear the terms distance learning and telemedicine, we think schools and hospitals, and sometimes we aren't aware of the ways that this technology might be used for educating and training that aren't necessarily within the confines of a school, a building, or campus. Similarly, on the telemedicine side, there's lots of things that organizations do that might not be necessarily within a healthcare entity or a hospital that is still bringing, whether it's health and wellness education or EMS and first responders. There's all kinds of ways that these definitions can span across different entities that look to apply for these funds. At the end of the day, this grant is looking to know that you're going to use this funding for technology to bring resources to rural and underserved communities, again, by way of that live, real-time, interactive distance learning or telemedicine service. Peter touched on this, so I won't spend much time on this, but just be aware of the things that might eliminate your grant from even being reviewed. There are certain requirements, as with all big federal grants, that you want to make sure that you're checking all the blocks. The grant gap application will include a checklist to make sure that you have all of the necessary pieces, but double check it multiple times. Things like, that contact with the state director, you're required to have a letter back from that office that says you have consulted with the state director's office and that your project is in line with the state strategic plan. those types of things, along with the compliance, the certifications, all of the forms that aren't necessarily as fun to work on as something like your needs and benefits section, where you get to tell that story, but are absolutely critical requirements to make you successful in this grant application. And then one more recommendation is always have another set of eyes on your application. Sometimes we get too close to our work and we know exactly what we're trying to say, but I always recommend before you hit that big submit button to have somebody else take a look and make sure it makes sense, it's clear, and that you have just another perspective looking at what it is you're trying to put together in that proposal. Tip number 4 is start early. I think Peter said it best, especially when you think about things like your SAM and grants.gov registration. Some of those credentials change over the years, they expire. There is no harm in getting that done today, whether or not you plan on applying for this grant when it comes out now or in a year or other federal grants. It is still such a good idea to make sure those things are all lined up and ready to go. There's no worse feeling than getting ready to submit your grant and realizing that you don't have the right credentials to log in, and you have to run in circles trying to figure that piece out. You can also start working on things like your project site list. Who are you including? What types of projects are you looking to do? You can start looking at your budget already, even before the grant guidelines come out, understanding those needs that you have and what is the technology or the solutions you're looking at that will help address them. All of that can be fine-tuned once we get the guidelines and see what changes have been made, but those are the principal pieces that you can start working on today to really be prepared when that grant opens up and you already have a strong understanding of what it is you're trying to do and perhaps what it is you're hoping to purchase with those funds. Again, I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but I just wanted to highlight other programs of interest that our team is constantly tracking and monitoring on the federal side. If you're interested in the RUS-DLT grant, these are other grant programs that have some similarities or have some similar priorities. Feel free to reach out to us and be happy to talk to you about some of these other programs that we anticipate. And with that, I'm going to do an introduction to our guests from Idaho State University. So joining us today, we have the team from the Include program at Idaho State University. They're with the College of Arts and Letters, and they have successfully applied for and won 2 RUS-DLT grants in the last 2 years. The first Include 1 RUS-DLT award was specifically focused on distance education to rural high schools in the area that ISU serves. And then Include 2 was the next phase of their project, and it is focused on bringing mental and physical health care services and education to those participating high schools. So they took the first year to really focus on the distance learning needs of those high schools and their communities. And then they expanded that to recognize the needs that they had on the healthcare side and expanded the program beyond just the College of Arts and Letters. It's a really fantastic story, and it's still going, and they're still working through it. So I'm very pleased to bring down my slides and kind of invite us into a conversation with the Idaho State team. So with that, I will let you all introduce yourselves and give an overview of what you all have been through the last few years, and give us kind of your story and your experience with this grant program.
Thank you, Dana and Peter. I am Candy Turley Ames, and I am the Dean of the College of Arts and Letters at Idaho State University. And with me today is Michelle Brumley. She is the Associate Dean for the Social and Behavioral Sciences at Idaho State University, and Holly Karchner, who is our Director of Outreach and Retention within the College of Arts and Letters at ISU. And before we begin, and I tell you a little bit about our community and our university and why we were well positioned for this particular funding mechanism, I want to say thank you to the USDA and to the RUS-DLT funding mechanism, as well as to Learning Design and Apply for their consulting. They both have been incredibly helpful in helping us better serve the communities within our service region. Idaho State University is a rural state institution. We are regional. We're a very large regional institution. If you look at it in terms of the square footage, if you will, of our state, we serve everything from Driggs, Idaho, to Twin Falls, Idaho, to Utah border and the Nevada border. And within those regions, we have the Shoshone-Bannock tribe as well. Idaho State University was created as a men's and women's working institution. And I think that speaks to the mission of our institution and the extent to which we need to be able to serve very broadly, and distance becomes a real challenge in serving all of those communities. Idaho State University is a comprehensive institution. We award everything from certificates to PhD degrees, and we have the state's health mission as well. So all of these variables play a really important role in setting us up and thinking about how we can better serve the communities in our service region and how this particular mechanism can help us do that. One of the things that Idaho State University has struggled with, as have many institutions throughout the United States, is declining enrollment. And at ISU, we struggled particularly with undergraduate enrollment. And the state of Idaho has recognized that concern and has defined actually some goals, set some goals for the state in terms of increasing enrollment, increasing the number of individuals who graduate from universities or with certificate programs from places like ISU. That is actually referred to in the state of Idaho as the go-on rate. So how many students or what percentage of students are going on to secure some kind of post-secondary credential. In the state of Idaho, only about 38% of students go on from high school to some post-secondary training. But the goal in the state of Idaho is to reach 60%. And the state of Idaho has actually put money behind this initiative, which is really important. They put money aside through what is known as advanced opportunities funding. And this actually pays for high school students to take college courses as a way of preparing them to actually matriculate to the university or to a college of tech or other kind of certificate programs. So they actually provide the funding to support students participating in these courses that actually meet their high school graduation requirements, as well as allow you to have university credit for those courses as well. What's interesting about the use of this money and where we saw the need is that there is a teacher shortage in the state of Idaho, and there is in particular a teacher shortage with individuals who are capable of delivering dual enrollment in their own high schools. So in Idaho, we're looking at having a master's degree to be able to deliver dual enrollment courses at the high school. And there are not as many folks as we would like in those high schools who are dual enrolled certified. So what we were trying to do is figure out how can we make more opportunities available? How can we help tackle this go-on rate? And in particular, how can we better serve those communities that may have very few, if any, dual qualified instructors? So we created a program that allowed, at Idaho State University, allowed high school students to come to campus to participate in these courses if they didn't have a dual enrollment teacher that was teaching a particular topic. That became known as our on-campus dual enrollment program. One of the things we recognized pretty quickly is that was a great program for the students who lived within a particular radius of the institution, but certainly wasn't equitable and certainly wasn't serving the entire region in the way that we wanted to. So we wanted to make those on-campus opportunities where high school students take classes with university students, with real college professors available to all of the communities in our service region. And that's where we came up with the idea that we could really leverage technology. We could really leverage distance learning technology to help us do that. So we really did expand, if you will, our on-campus dual enrollment opportunities to all of the communities, or the majority of the communities in our service regions, particularly the most rural communities, as a result of this funding. And we're very excited to share that with you and tell you how that project has grown over time. It would not be possible at all for us to have this project and to be successful in administering it if we didn't have somebody on our team who has the relationships with these rural high schools, who is really amazing. And that is my colleague, Holly Karchner, who is our Director of Outreach and Retention in the College of Arts and Letters. She has the relationship with all the high schools. I always joke about how I speak high school, I speak university, she speaks high school. And so together we became a really great team. And so with that, Holly, would you tell them more about our project?
Thanks, Candy. So what Candy said, that there has been a tremendous need, and I myself am from a very small rural Southeast Idaho community. I taught at a small rural Southeast Idaho school. And when I came to ISU, I was really excited about the opportunity to help rural students. And as I went out and worked with these different high schools, the need became so apparent. I think Idaho has some incredible students, and I'm sure all of you are working with some incredibly talented and gifted individuals, but the problem is they just don't have access to opportunity. So our goal from the day I started here at ISU is we need to provide opportunity, and do that opportunity, we're going to build relationships and sustainable relationships that will lift the barriers from our students so they can be successful, not only in a local market, but in a global market. So as I went out and I worked with these schools and I said, listen, we want to work with your kids and get them scholarships. And they just said, our kids just are not prepared to go to college. Some of these rural schools, they have the person that's their principal, the superintendent, he's the bus driver, he's the custodian, and he's the science teacher. And there's no way that they could add a college opportunity to this person's list of requirements. So we have these incredibly gifted and talented students who just simply did not have access to take college courses. And they start a year or two behind the rest of their peers when they would go to college. And it's expensive. So they couldn't even use the advanced opportunities money that Candy referenced because there was no one that was available to provide that. There's a few online places they can take that, but students really, and COVID's proven nothing else, is that students do better when they have an actual teacher. If we have a student in a very rural community that's interested in anthropology, there's no way that student could ever take that kind of a course. So when this grant opportunity came up, we had built those relationships with these schools, and they were already seeking an opportunity for their kids to take a dual enrollment course. So we gathered letters, we had support. And like Peter mentioned, I just can't emphasize this enough. When you go into a high school in these rural communities, you know that that is the center of activity in those communities. So when you start to provide dual credit, you've now opened up educational opportunities or in-service opportunities for every single member of that community. You now have teachers who can take courses and teach dual credit for kids in their own building. So you change a community when you provide this access to them. And that was our goal. We need to reduce barriers, increase opportunity, and build relationships so these students and these kids could be successful. But as we were working, we started to find there were other needs. And that's when we started working and talking with Michelle about what our next Include project was going to be. Michelle?
Thank you, Holly. So as a regional university in Southeast Idaho, we had two major needs that we were trying to meet for our rural communities. So with the first DLT grant that we were awarded, we aim to improve access to dual enrollment college courses. And we achieved this by providing 29 rural high schools with distance education technology. So now students in rural Idaho, they're able to participate in courses in real time with college professors and college student classmates from their own communities and earn college credit. And we've talked with many of these students, and they're truly excited to see that they can handle a college class. And now they're starting to think about futures that previously they thought were beyond their reach. Now with the second DLT grant that Holly referenced, what we're now beginning to address is access to mental and physical health services to students, to rural students, as well as educators. So we will be providing telehealth technology, services, and education to the same rural high schools as we did for the first phase of this project. Now to do this, we're partnering with health programs across our university and campuses at Idaho State. So we're partnering with programs from social work to nursing and pharmacy. And we're also partnering with local health clinics in our community. And the goal is to provide high school students in rural Idaho with access to telehealth care, such as when they're experiencing mental health issues, like Holly was finding out when she was talking with administrators at these schools. The goal is also to provide education and training to parents and high school staff to learn about healthcare resources and how to help these students in need. And so part of the focus on education is addressing signs of opioid and other substance abuse, smoking and vaping, and suicide. And I'd like to share with you that right now we are conducting listening sessions with high school administrators to help us figure out how we can tailor our services to their needs. And according to them, we cannot get into their schools fast enough. And this really highlights an important aspect of our project overall that I think you've heard both Candy and Holly highlight, that we have consistently listened to the students and educators about how we can help them. Our project is truly about relationship building and support between Idaho State and our communities, and we never lose sight of that. And so with the support of the DLT grants, we're now able to use technology to support these collaborations, which has been incredibly helpful. And in today's society, it's necessary. So with that, I will toss things back to you, Dana.
Thank you so much. I was just thinking as you all were talking, I never know if I'm going to burst into tears or get chills when you all are sharing your story, because what you all have done in a very short amount of time. I know there was a lot of work and time before these applications went in, but it's beautiful and it's impactful and it's just getting started. And I just think that's the coolest part about what you all have done. I think, Holly, you touched on this in the beginning, but I think for the audience, it might be helpful to kind of reiterate this point. One of the tips I always suggest and encourage in pursuing this grant is to focus on your needs and benefits section, really identifying those needs and understanding those before you begin any sort of grant application, whether it's this or other initiatives and programs. What are those needs? How will we address those needs? Because that really forms your story and the narrative for the proposal. I think one thing that you touched on, and that might be helpful to expand on a little bit, is starting with what you know, with existing relationships, with well-documented existing needs that you already know about. That helps build a natural story rather than trying to create something. You read a grant application and you say, oh, I think I can fit into this box. Let me see if I can come up with some things to go in there. I think you started with include one with existing needs and existing challenges with those relationships you already had. Do you mind just walking us through sort of that process a little bit more from the first iteration of the proposal? And then I know things change and develop as you start working on things. I'm sure some additional challenges and needs came to light through that first process and probably started giving you hints that there might be another one in the future after this. But do you mind just kind of talking the audience through that a little bit more in depth, like the existing relationships and work that you already had going?
So we did have a scholarship program that is really just targeted to our more rural, well, to the rural service area that we have. So I was working with those schools, and then we also have a program where we have professors that go and present to these different schools. So I was working with the schools on that level, and as a former high school teacher myself, I was always asking, how is your dual credit program going? How are these different things? And they just said, boy, is there any way you can help us? Because what ISU could provide for them would be like a clearinghouse of instruction. And they didn't even know where to start to say, well, who could provide us all of these services, chemistry, psychology, sociology, all of the things that they don't offer. So that's where that conversation really started. But I'm going to tell you, Dana, there's more to it than this, because when you're committed to these small communities, you kind of become part of them. And the reason that makes a difference is when it came down for us to apply for that grant, we didn't really have to work really hard for letters of support. They said, what do we need to do to get this to happen? So we ended up submitting letters of support from county commissioners who said, what can we do to help? This is something our county needs. Mayors, a state legislator, these are all people who knew what we were doing because they knew we were invested in their community, because we were visible. We did not come out of the woodwork and say, oh, hey, we need a grant. We want to do a grant. Do you want a partner? It was, of course, it was a very natural, smooth transition to work with ISU because we were already there.
I think that's such a great point. And I think for those that are considering something like this type of a grant application or this program, it's not to say that you have to have all of the things in place, but it is to go with what you know and who you know. And I think that's such a perfect example too. I was speaking with another recipient of this grant recently, a State Department of Corrections. And because this grant is limited in what it will fund, you know, it funds the technology, it funds the tools that you need for delivering this content. But something important to note too is that this program doesn't fund the personnel, those salaries for who's going to be driving the project forward. So you do need to think about those things from a sustainability perspective, from a support perspective. You want those existing relationships to really have already bought into what your vision is so that you know the project will be successful. In that example of the State Department of Corrections, one thing I found really inspiring was they said, hey, we're going for this grant. We're going to be delivering educational and healthcare services for the inmate community in all of those facilities across the state. News traveled of this project. They were going forward, but they had these existing relationships with local community colleges, with their healthcare providers. It got all the way up to the governor's office that basically said, what all do you need? What else do you need? And they said, well, we need statewide Wi-Fi connectivity for us to be able to actually deliver this stuff via the technology. But it was a project already in motion, and they had the buy-in of those existing relationships and the support that led to additional funding for the program outside of the grant application. And it's made the project grow even bigger legs and continue to expand. And I think that's a good example of what you all have done as well. And then looking as the transition into Include 2, I was hoping maybe you all could kind of help walk us through maybe even more on the logistical side of things, because going for these grants always takes coordination internally. And at a bigger university like yours, there are always hoops to jump through and different departments to work with. Do you mind kind of talking us through the expansion from Include 1 to Include 2? Because you expanded it beyond your department, including more for the telehealth aspect of it. What did that look like, both from a program design perspective, but also from engaging with other departments and sort of sharing the coordination of the budget and who gets what and who's responsible for what?
Well, it was a fast and furious process. We didn't have very much time to engage in it, but when we did, you know, we understood that we could not duplicate the same thing or just have an extension of the Include 1 project with the dual enrollment. And so we were trying to figure out how we could continue to address the needs of these schools and build on the relationships that we've built with the schools from Include 1, and how we could also build on that infrastructure that we acquired with the DLT grant. And so those were a couple of things that we took into account. And then we also were pretty motivated by the fact that our institution has the health mission for the state. And so we figured that with the telemedicine component, this would be a natural way to kind of branch out with the Include project and also meet some of the needs that Holly was really hearing about when she was talking with some of the school administrators. You know, sometimes these students weren't coming to classes, not because they were missing classes, but there were mental health concerns. And so we realized that if we want these students to go on to college, there's much more than just the academic side in terms of supporting them. And so Candy and I, we reached out to a bunch of folks here at ISU. We reached out to vice presidents, to deans, to program directors. And in particular, we reached out to our Division of Health Sciences, and we talked with folks in different fields to figure out what we could maybe put together. Could we put something together that was cohesive? And in neuroscience, they talk about something called blooming and pruning. This is where you produce during early development an overabundance of neurons, and then you prune away those connections and through experience to fine tune your brain connections. And Candy and I sort of went through that process where we met with so many different people, collected a bunch of different ideas, and then we had to sit down and say, okay, we need to be strategic about this. How can we build on what we have? how can we strategically develop more of these relationships and really deliver what we say we're going to deliver, right? We do not want to overcommit to these schools and not be able to deliver. And so through that process, we were able to figure out, let's address the mental health and the physical health concerns. And we have different departments that are contributing in different ways, but we also have a number of collaborating departments that they're ready to jump in. So like if the mental health component gets too big for us and it's too overwhelming for like social work and nursing and counseling, psychology is ready to jump in. We also have the Spanish program that is ready to jump in and help us with translation services. So by talking with folks, I will say this was such a natural, I think part of it is we have this enthusiasm, this passion for the project, and nearly everybody wanted to be involved. So it was a matter of figuring out, okay, how can we make this manageable? And then figuring out ways to roll different programs in when it makes sense. So I hope that answers your question, Dana.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that helps for people that are looking to start something and start to figure out who to talk to and what does that look like. And I think it all comes down to if you have a strong understanding of the needs, then people do want to buy in and get involved, because if they have that expertise or that special skill to help solve those problems with you, it does naturally start to work in the right direction together. But it is no easy feat. So hats off to you all for making it happen 2 years in a row and many beyond that as you serve the high schools that are involved. Thank you again so much for being a part of this. I'm going to shift to answer just a few of the questions in the chat. And Peter, I'll lean on you for some as well. I think you've been helpful and actively responding to some as well. But one thing, and Michelle, you just touched on this, so I think it's a nice segue to one of the questions that we received. The question is, what if I am requesting the same type of equipment, but for new sites, or to be used in new ways for different purposes? And again, that's to that duplication question that you all kind of had to make sure that you were staying in line, because you were including many of the same locations as your first round, but the equipment was going to be new. It was going to be for separate purposes for the healthcare aspect, and that was going to look different. That form factor of what would be served for the telehealth purposes of your program, they'd be in different rooms at those schools. They'd be used by different people. I think that is the key in terms of addressing duplication. You never want the same locations to be using the same exact equipment for the same purposes. So as long as you can expand and change the project to all new purposes and all new either locations or new pieces of the project, it will be in compliance. Peter, is there anything you want to add as far as that duplication piece?
No, I think, Dana, you explained it perfectly. And in your narrative and how you're explaining what that intended use is, just be explicitly clear, and that it is different and that it has its unique solution that's being delivered.
Perfect. Thank you. Another question that came in, and I believe you're in chat on this already, Peter, but in case it's helpful for everyone, one of the questions is around, does it have to be distance learning that is synchronous? And I think that question's probably alluding to, can it be, pre-recorded and streamed out later? And I'll take a stab at this, and then Peter, feel free to correct me. But I think the definition of distance learning and telemedicine in this grant is that it's that live 2 or more way interactive video conferencing connection. So the synchronous piece is critical for it to be eligible.
Yes, it's not to be a push or a pull sort of situation. It's that it is live. It is a teaching moment. It could be recorded and sent, but it has to have that interaction between the teacher and the student for it to be synchronous.
Wonderful. And then I think one of the last questions that we can, and then we'll have to close out, is around providing satellite internet systems. And I think that would probably fall under the eligibility with the 20% broadband rules, but there are some restrictions on how it's owned and operated. Is that correct, Peter, in terms of the type of connectivity that is eligible?
Yes. And so for mobile, if you had, let's say a mobile library maybe, or a mobile teaching unit that was going out, and you needed to provide the connectivity to that. Yes, you could, that would qualify, and it can't be more than 20%, and the 3 years that it, for the life of the grant. So the costs that you put in have to be equal to that 3 years of supporting that service that you're delivering.
Thank you for that. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for our session today, but thank you to everyone who was able to join us and spend some time with us. Later today, you will receive the recording as well as the slide deck from today's presentation. You are always welcome to reach out to us for questions, specific questions or ideas, and help with developing your own RUS-DLT proposal. We'd be happy to walk through some of these in detail with you. And then, of course, reach out to your general field representative at the USDA for guidance and for some of those really specific questions to make sure that you're in line with all of the USDA's requirements for this program and possibly for other grants that are out there through the USDA. So thank you so much to our panelists for ISU for joining us. Peter, thank you for being here. It really means a lot to us to have your expertise and your words of wisdom from some people that have actually done this out in the real world. So many thanks, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.